Hello, and welcome to the Feet on the Soil podcast, the podcast about the world beneath our feet and how we interact with it. As anybody who's grown up or lived here knows, Ireland is full of wild stories. Whether these be the exaggerated tales shared around the table of a pub, or the stories of time gone by told to us by older members of the family at Christmas or other family gatherings, we are a nation of storytellers. But these stories are not just shared amongst friends, written in books, or told through myths. They are kept in the land itself. In this new 3-part series, Unseen Ireland, we will explore the secret side of Ireland, its hidden species, forgotten places, and the folklore that still lingers in our fields, mountains, and skies, just out of view. After long days of admiring buds and bird calls in spring, laying in the sun in summer, and the bounty of foraging that comes along with autumn, winter suddenly brings with it a feeling of quiet and darkness. It can come as a bit of a shock. After experiencing all the life and excitement of the seasons before, suddenly we are left in something very, very different. But it's not impossible to find things to admire. It's not impossible to find things to look for in the darkness. And that will be the topic of today's episode. The darkness is something that you get used to pretty quick living in Ireland. In the short days of winter, it feels like daytime is merely a blink between sunrise and sunset, and then it's back to the dark. And while we have torches, street lights, lamps over our head, our ancestors had none of these things. So darkness is something that culturally means a lot here. In this episode, not only will we be describing the creatures that come out at night time, both above our head, at our feet, and underground, but also some of the folklore both associated with these animals and things completely paranormal. So for this episode of Unseen Ireland, I recommend waiting till the sun has set, the moon has risen, before you start to listen. And really listen, not just to this podcast, but to what goes on outside. You see, contrary to what we can sometimes believe, life doesn't stop when the sun sets. In fact, in some places, the landscape can almost feel more alive than ever. Imagine yourself now out in a field. You're a bit in the middle of nowhere, the stars above you are really quite bright, and the moon is casting a gentle, gentle light on everything around you. While wandering, you find yourself looking up to see a streak of bright white light fly above your head noiselessly. But you know what this is. It's the barn owl. Now the barn owl, as much as being an incredible, incredible species just to see, is ecologically just as amazing. Its broad, heart-shaped face takes in the sounds around it and focuses them into 2 large ear holes. Like any nocturnal creature, owls have had to adapt to do with the lack of light, and their method for this is to have that supersonic hearing. Mainly hunting rodents like field mice, the owl will use this satellite disc-like face to focus in the sounds of a field mouse across a field. Each ear operates almost independently, allowing them to fully track down up until the last second exactly where that mouse is. This talent makes the barn owl an extremely well-equipped hunter. With a high success rate, this is one of the main ecological benefits of the owl. It is our native pest control. Flying over fields of crops, it'll defend them from the noble field mouse by hunting between 3 and 4 mice per night. Unfortunately, due to changes in farming and land use in general, the numbers of barn owls have been in decrease across Ireland for many years. Operations like the Barn Owl Project have been setting up nest boxes around the country and educating people on the beauty of these birds in an effort to help bring them back. And one thing that we see with the barn owl is something that we might not expect. When I bring up owls, there's probably a sound that immediately comes to your mind. The hoo-hoo-hoot of an owl at night time. But the barn owl, while quite cute and noble looking, has a sound that is almost blood-curdling. This call, paired with its broad white face, is seen to be one of the origins of the banshee, a piece of folklore that I'll talk about a little bit later. But as you walk through this imaginary nighttime field, you realize that it is not only owls that are flying around above you. Just out of your ear, you can almost feel a sound, a click, click, click. And above you, you can hear a flap. Leathery wings beating against furry bodies, flying around almost like an air show, is a family of bats. In Ireland, we have 9 species of bat, and of these 9, not one of them will suck your blood. So don't worry, you're safe. The only thing not safe is a small flying insect, because bats require about 3,000 insects per night. You may wonder how, in the dark of night, a bat is able to catch 3,000 insects individually. And of course, it is their echolocation. Echolocation acts almost like some high-tech military radar. The bat emits a sound, a high-pitched sound, far above what we can hear. That sound travels out in front of it, bounces off trees, bushes, hair, insects, and comes back to the bat, allowing them to see what's in front of them using just their ears. Now, while it may seem similar, the bat and the owl are using very different techniques here. The owl is simply able to hear the sounds that its prey is making, whereas the bat is almost creating a 3D environment around it of bouncing sounds and using that to track down its prey. And the sound each bat produces is incredibly complex. A bat can produce about 5 or 6 pulses of sound per second while navigating, but this can go all the way up to 100 or even 200 pulses per second when it's hunting. It produces this sound that almost sounds like a marble bouncing on a marble floor. And this pulse is linked to their heart rate. So while hunting, a bat momentarily can bring its heart rate up to about 200 beats per second, which if that was happening to anybody listening, you might want to call an ambulance. While these sounds are far too high-pitched for our human ears to hear, we can hear them by using a bat detector. With this, we can tell a little bit more than whether it's just a hunting buzz, a navigating call, or a social call. We can even tell what species of bat we're dealing with. Each bat will speak, quote unquote, at a different frequency in a different way. And because of this, we can exactly identify what we're seeing flying above our heads. Bats have commonly been seen as dark beings, as omens of death or things that get stuck in our hair. But I think this is a bit unfair, as much like the barn owl, they are our native pest control. Bats will live essentially anywhere they can get into, whether that be in an old building, the crack of a tree, or in amongst ivy vines. So that wild little corner in the field that we're in is perfect for them to call home during the daytime when they sleep. And now, after spending some time with our head in the clouds, we're going to bring our gaze down. We're going to continue walking through the field all the way to the edge where we find an old native hedgerow. Ruffling around just at the bottom through a bundle of twigs, we can see a little creature, a very strange looking creature, covered in spikes. The little creature we see is of course the hedgehog, a species which has become a favourite of children's books. It was brought over by the Normans and is now a scavenger of gardens and hedgerows just like this one. Much like the bats and owls mentioned before, hedgehogs will have a great sense of hearing to make up for the fact that they're out during the night. But also, they have their nice long nose, great for smelling. Each hedgehog can have between 5,000 and 7,000 spines, and they use this as a defense mechanism. When prodded by a dog, a fox, or anything else that wants to chow down on the hedgehog, they can curl into a ball, protecting themselves with those long spines. Hedgehogs have sometimes been referred to as the gardener's friend. This is because of their almost voracious eating habit. They are predators, they are carnivorous, and will mainly eat things like worms, slugs, and beetles. These, especially the slugs, are essentially the enemy of the market gardener. Unfortunately for the hedgehog, the reason that they are in Ireland, as I said, is because of the Normans. And they brought them over because they were fairly voracious eaters. And the hedgehogs were originally brought over as a foodstuff. This is thought to be one of the origins of the Irish name for a hedgehog, which is Gran Yog, which means either little ugly thing or horrible little thing, which is a bit unfair considering how cute they are. But if you imagine yourself as a native of Ireland many, many years ago when the Norman invaders came in, they would stick up fence posts and have a small field of hedgehogs that they would use for food. So to see one of these things was to see your future, your village gone, your life changed, and your nation taken. That could be the origin of the name, or maybe just someone really didn't like hedgehogs. And while hunkering down, admiring this little ugly thing, you hear a scream, not quite like the barn owl, but still as blood-curdling. After relaxing from that little bit of a fright, you realise that that scream is unmistakably a fox. The hedgehog darts back into the hedgerow to keep himself safe, and as we turn around, we see the fox staring back at us from the other side of the field. Foxes are obviously known as an intelligent and adaptable creature. They seem almost as comfortable in suburban streets as they are on the hillside, and foxes have always been seen as something cunning. This is a little story from duachas.ie and their school's collection about the cunningness of a fox. Here in Ireland, many stories are told about the cunningness of a fox. This is a story which I heard my father tell. One night, a farmer heard a great noise in the fowl house. The hens were flying around and causing great commotion. The farmer got up and rushed to the fowl house and burst open the door. The first thing he saw was a great big fox, lying dead to all appearances. The farmer lifted up the fox and threw him outside the door, and returned again to the fowl house to find out if any of the hens had been killed. Having satisfied himself that no damage was done, he locked up the fowl house again and went to the spot where he had thrown the fox. But there was no sign of the latter there. It was then the farmer found out the fox had feigned death and played a trick on him. Alongside just killing farmers' chickens, foxes have long been associated with the puka. Much like the banshee, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But as we watch the fox run away, we see it going underground into its den. But it is not the only inhabitant. Deep down below, another family are rustling away. Beneath our feet, a family of badgers are rustling and going about their tasks as we sleep. The badger is an intelligent and social creature which has long been unfairly prosecuted as a dirty animal which brings disease with it. Ecologically, their digging aerates the soil, creates home for insects, and will create microhabitats suitable for other mammals, even like our fox or the rabbit. But on top of that, they are fascinating, charismatic, and really lovable creatures. I was lucky enough in the last 2 years to find a small family of badger living somewhere that I visit very often. I set up some wildlife cameras and got to enjoy every morning going in and seeing the videos of the 2 adult badgers just performing tasks, gathering food, gathering leaves. And one day, when I took out the footage, I noticed a new little addition, their little baby badger. I watched as the parents played with the child, taught it how to gather materials and even hunt food. And all the while I was thinking to myself, what a beautiful creature they are. Badgers can get quite far underground as well. They can get down to about 4 meters of depth. And the den typically will almost be handed down through generations, with the baby badger that I captured on film hopefully taking over from where his parents left off. Badgers have also been documented visiting other badger families. They can have a huge range that they hunt within, about 300 acres, but sometimes various badger families will live within the same hunting grounds, and rather than fighting or warring for their land, they'll visit each other and play and hunt together. After all this wandering around I've made you do, it's time to take a seat, lie down and look up. Because reflecting what's down below, the sky above us was seen in the past as a reflection of the landscape. The Milky Way was known by many names in Irish, and one that I like is Bealach na Bó Finne. I'm not great at Irish, so I'm going to say that passed. That translates to Path of the White Cow. Now this could be seen as a reference to the River Boyne, a river named after the goddess Boyne, whose name comes from Bo Find, meaning white cow. We may be able to interpret this as our ancestors seeing the Milky Way not as a collection of stars and gas millions and millions and millions of miles away, but instead as a reflection of the river that ran alongside them. As I said earlier, our ancestors did not have torches on their phone, or street lights, or lamps, or at times even candles. It was just firelight and the stars above and the moon that gave them light at night time. Because of this, people were far more in tune with the night sky. We see ancient monuments like Newgrange and Loch Crew aligned with the stars. But now, in recent years, artificial light has not only affected the animals around us by interrupting the natural circadian rhythm or interrupting bats with their sensitive eyes, but also this has affected ourselves as humans. The sky above us has been dimmed by our artificial stars, but organisations like Dark Skies Ireland are fighting to almost rewild our skies, to take back that darkness. There have been many nights where I've stared out my rooftop window trying to see if I can spot constellations or the Milky Way, only to be left a little bit underwhelmed. I live just outside of Dublin City, so the bright lights from the urban centre have basically nulled out the light of the stars. I can get little glimpses of what might once have been there when I either go down the country or even when I just get a little bit further outside of Dublin, getting out into the hills in Wicklow. I look up and it is different. There's a kind of feeling that you get where the sky feels taller and everything just feels that little bit more magical. But I'd be lying if I said that sometimes in the darkness, when I'm looking up at the sky, I don't get that little twinge of fear. It's almost like the world is too big and I just can't make sense of it. But as long as the sun has set and others have experienced darkness like this, people have filled that darkness with stories, and Ireland is certainly no different. Folklore was usually there to teach a lesson, and a lot of folklore is there to teach a lesson of don't go outside once the sun has set. One story that I was pretty terrified of when I was a kid was that of the banshee, one that I've mentioned already in this episode, said to have come from the sound and look of an owl, or maybe even the call of a fox. The banshee was always described to me as an old woman who would sit on country roads with her hairbrush. If you were to hear the scream of the banshee, it meant that you were going to die. I've heard other people say that it meant that a death of someone close to you was coming, but I was always told if you hear that scream, you're finished. So whenever I was walking on country roads, which was more common than you'd think when I was a child, I would nearly be covering my ears out of fear of hearing the banshee scream. One thing that I found out while researching this episode was that there's apparently different families that have their own banshee. So something that the banshee would typically do in folklore is keen, so cry out for someone who has recently died. And apparently certain families had their own banshee who would cry when people in their families died. One myth that I didn't hear when I was a child, but I heard a bit more about while I was growing up, was that of the puka or puka. I've heard different people say it different ways, but it's a shape-shifting kind of being. And I always found it quite interesting that it was neither good or bad. Depending on where the specific story is from, when it's from, or who told it, the puka could turn into many different things. It could be the tail of a fox, it could be a black horse, it could be even a bat, as we've mentioned, or an owl. But the main thing is that it would find people who were out on their own at night and lead them astray. The puka would ask people to get on its back and it would bring them for a wild ride, sometimes as far as going to the moon and back, but it would always drop them back to exactly where they had started. I think a bit of this myth could come from people coming home late from the pub and needing an excuse for their delay, but the puka's kind of gone through a bit of a resurgence lately because of the Puka Festival, a festival around Halloween that celebrates Samhain. And this is another thing with all of these creatures, as well as the darkness being that of night to day, it is also the darkness of the summer to winter. Winter is a time that is in all ways darker. There's less food, there's less light, there's less life. I think a lot of the reason for a lot of these ghost stories and pieces of folklore was a way of kind of passing the time, but also of creating almost warnings. The banshee kind of warns you against wandering out on the roads at night. The puka had a kind of another side to it, as well as bringing people to the moon and back. It was said that any crops that were left out after Samhain would be kind of puka crops, needed to be left there for the puka. And a similar story is one that I heard growing up, where after the end of September, you weren't to take berries from the bushes because the fairies essentially had gone piss on the berries, and because of that, they were not to be touched. And all of this kind of ties back to nature. You leave those berries on the bush, number one, because the fairies have peed on them, but also because they're a very important foodstuff for birds and different creatures in the autumn time and late winter when they really need food. The puka transforms into all these beasts, and it kind of warned you away from them at night, instead of scaring them off while they might be hunting for food or just trying to go about their lives. The puka kind of told us to have a bit of reverence for these animals. We don't know what they could be, so we have to be a bit careful of them. These myths didn't just come from a kind of a fear of the dark. They were reflections of how people viewed the landscape after light. So next time you're out for a wander, whether it be just after the sun has set or far into witching hour, you have a few things to look out for. It might be the screech of a barn owl, it might be the flutter of a bat, the rustling of a badger, or the spikes under your foot of a hedgehog. But you will definitely have something to see, something to find. But the most important thing, in order to be able to see any of those things, make sure you try and get outside tonight.